In the previous video that I did, based mainly upon morality, I said that the question, is something good because God says it is, or does God say it's good because it is good outside of him, is fundamental to understanding ultimately reality. What I meant by that statement isn't so much that an understanding of how God determines morality is dependent upon that, but how God determines anything, what his act of creation consists of. So you could change it into a formula. Is X X because God says it is, or does God say X is X because it is, outside of his will, but outside of what he says? And this is key to ultimately understanding reality as reality. Understanding why reality is constituted in the way it is. The reason why the law of gravity acts as it is because God willed it to act that way. So if we look at how science tries to define gravity, science hasn't yet come up with a proven definition for gravity. All that science does is define how gravity behaves. So it gives you a law. It says gravity is the law which states two objects of mass will always attract. Yes, that is what gravity does. But what is gravity? And then they'll talk about how gravity is the result, according to the theory of relativity, of objects of mass causing space and time to warp. Well, how does that happen? Yet again, you could say that is the definition of gravity as such, but then you've broken it up into two constituent parts. You've performed an analysis of the concept of gravity and broke it up into mass, space-time and warping. So what is it about mass that causes space-time to warp? What we've witnessed here in how a scientist breaks down gravity in order to explain it is the universal form of how all explanation takes place. Really, the question that it all boils down to is why are the laws the way they are? Now then, some people will say that due to quantum fluctuations a few seconds after the Big Bang or even before the Big Bang, they determined the physical constants, which then determined the physical laws at large. Okay, that may answer the question about how the physical laws or the physical constants came to be what they are. But then the interrelation between the physical constant, the quantum fluctuations and things that happened before or at the Big Bang, they would be governed by certain laws to produce certain results, i.e. the constants that we see. So I've had some people say, well, one person on YouTube said, I can't remember their name now, but one person on YouTube said that the physical constants are interrelated, and how one physical constant is defined, or whatever value is given to one physical constant, governs how the other physical constants, governs what the other physical constants are going to be. You would then have a set of laws which govern the interrelations between the physical constants then. And you still have to ask the question, how did these laws come about? Why are they the way they are? Because they're a level of complexity, aren't they? If there's a law which isn't actually the physical objects themselves, which determines how those physical objects will behave, then where did that law come from? Also, these laws themselves aren't physical. They're not material. The law of gravity is not either of the objects of mass that are coming towards each other, that are being attracted. The law of gravity is a relation between the two, or how they affect one another. And it's and like all the laws, it is universal and necessary, i.e., it's universal in that everywhere you go, it will be enforced, and necessary because every time that the conditions of objects of mass being there, it will always enact, it will always happen. That essentially is what science is all about. Science is all about observing phenomena in order to discover the patterns behind the phenomena, or the laws that govern how phenomena behave. And the fact is that these laws are arbitrary. Some people trying to prove the existence of God, they will use the process known as principle of what's that thing? I can't remember what it's called. Essentially, where they find there being certain things in reality which, if they were a tiny little bit different, wouldn't allow life to exist as we know it. But the thing is, the reason why life is what it is because it's defined in a certain way, and it's given that definition by God. And so God is kind of like a painter, and he paints all these laws, and he gives all these definitions to things, and makes them what they are. And we, as people observing reality, all that we really do is discover what is already there. We do not put in anything new there. We really discover meaning that is already out there. So in terms of the law of gravity that was discovered by watching objects of mass come towards each other again and again, first of all just on the Earth and then out in space, what we are doing, we are actually discovering something that is actually there already. There is meaning out there. Now then, where does that meaning come from? You know, where does it come from? If we're really the only ones that can understand this meaning, is the meaning there without us being there? That's the old argument of idealism, where they say that meaning only comes from a mind. Therefore, all the meaning we see in reality comes from either two sources: our mind, which is outside of our own and infinitely bigger than our own, or our own mind. And the truth of all this fact, of the idea that meaning only comes from a mind, has been held up in philosophy, where in the early 20th century you had the theory of logical positivism, where it brought about all the quantifying things, and it's really the foundation for science. And essentially, in logical positivism, it's the idea that you can quantify everything and put it down into its constituent parts, and you'll be able to discover the definition. But it failed, because you've got to explain where it got the definition from. And because scientists at that time, and the logical positivists, weren't prepared to acknowledge a meaning giver outside of themselves, they were left in this, they ended up in this postmodernist stream, where now philosophy has diverted seriously from science, because philosophy has found an inherent weakness and logical fallacy within logical positivism. So it's left that behind and gone away into postmodernism and existentialism, trying to find truth in other areas, even the whole belief that there is no truth. That's what philosophy's gone into, realising the logical fallacy of logical positivism. But the scientists and the majority of atheists, that they're still running along blindly, following after this logical positivism, believing that they can come to a complete and utter understanding of reality just by examining material objects and how they interrelate. And that's the ultimate result of not acknowledging a meaning giver outside of ourselves, who created the whole of reality and gave it meaning. Because we then have no source or means by which we can insert meaning into reality other than by ourselves. And so we either end up saying one of two things. We either end up ignoring the question of why is reality constituted the way it is, how did it come to be like it is, and why are the laws like they are, and the whole condition for any set of laws existing. We then start saying to people, like the common reply that I have when I ask people about why the laws are the way they are and not any other way, and how they came to be, they just reply to me, oh, they're naturally occurring phenomena and you don't need to posit some all-knowing being to explain them. But that's not really answering the question. It's basically saying I acknowledge the fact that the laws exist and also the fact that you can question them, but I don't acknowledge that you can answer them, and therefore it's pointless to even ask the question. Basically they're saying, yes, it's true that there are laws, but shut up. because it shows a fallacy, a hole in their thinking, because they can't supply the reason for why the laws are what they are. And it's the same with all things, why things are what they are. So the logical positivist, the scientist, he's working with data. And where does he get that data from? It comes from his surroundings, from reality as a whole. And what the job of the scientist is to turn this data into knowledge, to turn this meaningless data, or supposedly meaningless data, into meaningful information. Or, as scientists say, or as is a dream of it anyway, to get from the data the meaning that's already in it, to get from outside the meaning that's already there. But they've got to explain how the meaning got there. If they can't explain that, then all that they're doing is building card castles without a table. There's no ground there for them. And so, if you don't acknowledge the existence of a God or a meaning giver to reality, then you can't explain the meaning. And that's why a lot of atheists who are honest intellectuals acknowledge the fact that what they're doing, they're giving meaning to the meaningless. I don't believe that, because I believe in the meaning giver. But if you don't believe in the meaning giver, and then ultimately, logically, you end up in the postmodernist morass where you say that all that a scientist is doing, all that humans actually do, is give meaning to the meaningless. Try and make sense of the absurd. This is the old Nietzschean abyss, that we look into. He says that man is like an animal looking into the abyss, and the abyss looks into you. They try and mystify it. But it boils down to, at the end, that if there is no God, there is no meaning. And man, as an animal that gives meaning, is fatally tragic in that he's in the absurd, trying to make sense of the nonsensible.